Hello again, friends. I've been debating which type of video to do next. I was thinking of doing a state of Buddyfight, and I have a large chunk of the script for that written, but I decided that I wanted to do something that I really should have done for Vanguard. A general purpose article spanning across multiple types of decks, and my current tier list for Buddyfight decks as of set 5 and the Golden Buddy Pack, with some Japanese promos here and there that we may or may not be getting soon, so take those with a grain of salt. Deck types exist in most card games, like aggro, control, or the best Hearthstone deck ever, Malygos Burn Paladin. You see these and other such types of decks in Magic. It's hard to define things like this in Vanguard, where you essentially just have Kagero, Rush decks, and not as good as Kagero as your three deck types. I mean, there are burst decks, sustained late game pressure decks, and other such things in Vanguard, but the simplicity of the game and the dominance of control really takes away from all of the strategic mumbo jumbo that you could attribute to it. Fortunately, Buddyfight isn't quite like that. You can easily attribute many of these deck types to Buddyfight decks, and they all work out pretty well. You'll also find that some of the strongest decks in the game cross over into multiple territories. For Buddyfight, we have four major archetypes of decks. First, we have Rush decks. Rush decks tend to focus on quickly bombarding you with either mini attacks or high critical attacks. Examples of Rush decks would be a size 1 focused 72 pillars deck that tries to end games with Saturday Night Devil Fever to hit you with 6 attacks in a single turn. Sometimes with a 3 critical size 1, which is why they got bumped up on the tier list, because that is really helping them out. Armor Knight Ace builds focus on sending Cerberus Ace to Soul to have a really high critical weapon and swinging in with that really, really strong attack. And they also could potentially use Fang Dragon Declaration if they have deck space and gauge for it to negate any spells that would stop that attack and just bop your opponent in the face for 5, 8, even 11 damage. Adventurer Pure is another good rush deck because it can grab anything from its deck that it needs with Mission Card Form a Party, and it can end games quickly with Tetsuya, 3 critical adventurers for Tetsuya to link attack with and restand, Bladewing Phoenix, and other such cards that can just rip straight into your opponent and deal 11, 14 damage turns, and it can get ridiculous pretty quickly. Second, we have control decks. Control decks focus on removing field presence from your opponent. These decks include beastly cards like Inferno Armordragon, Meteor Rain, and Actor Knight's Judgment. These are 3 of the best cards in the game, all sporting multiple pluses, or Soul Guard and Penetrate, and a counter destruction ability if you're Meteor Rain. And they all have respectable stats attached to them as well. These cards can easily pick apart your opponent's field while being relatively difficult to remove themselves from being size 3 and having decent stats. Inferno Armor can even be played in a generic Armordragon deck with Day of Dragon and Dragonic Destroy, along with their 2 patron cards, Viking Sword Dragon, which allows you to attack after you've used Day of Dragon, and Destroy Hammer Dragon, which burns your opponent for 3 damage after you cast Dragonic Destroy. And every single one of those destruction abilities can target size 3, so your Sigur's gone, man. It's just not there anymore. The Wombo combo is great for these decks, and literally all of the destruction can hit size 3s, which is what makes them so strong. Judgment's deck has Death Grip and Death Shield for counter destruction, death damage from main phase destruction, and its own effect added into the mix. That's not counting the fact that Fortune Shield gives it 11,000 defense and counterattack. Control is the name of its game. It bides until it can hit another copy of itself, then plus 4s, gives you 3 life, and forces them to have to get around a 6/3/6 that most removal can't target. Meteor Rain isn't really a control deck so much as just a single control card in a grind deck, and I'll discuss that in a little bit. So third, we have grind decks. Grind decks focus on making the game take as long as possible and winning through card advantage, life gain, attrition, or any combination of those 3. Now, grind decks often focus on playing control style, only they don't necessarily have control abilities built into their cards. Some grind decks have barely any control effects, like Blue Sky Knights, whose primary focus is protecting their creatures with their dragon shields and skies in your hand, while gaining stupid amounts of life with their base abilities, Green Dragon Song, Green Dragon Shield, so that even if you get attacked directly, you barely feel it because you have so much life. Likewise, Dungeon Enemy Pure focuses on having free revivable size 0s with Demon Lord's Dungeon, and walling with beefy hard-to-kill size 3s in your center that have Soul Guard, and possibly Alerta for counterattack to plus off of. This is kind of like Seeger, only if Seeger had good support. While dungeon enemies do have Meteor Rain, they don't actually have any control cards outside of that and Alerta, and both of those cards are on your field, and your opponent can see when you have the capability of destroying one of their creatures. So that's another thing that kind of makes it not so much a control deck as a grind deck. It's more of the threat of it, and less of the actual existence of it, if that makes sense. Some grind decks do have control and card advantage built in. One example would be Actor Knight's Judgment. I think we're going to hear that card a lot. Judgment can destroy 2 cards and lets you draw 2 cards, and then you gain 3 life. That's literally life gain, attrition, and card advantage. Huh. While still being a 3 crit beater on the board that your opponent has to get around, and that removal can't really target unless it can hit size 3s. That's kind of nuts. Then again, Judgment is arguably the best deck in the game for the set 5 format, spoiler alert. Wizards are another solid example of a grind deck. They don't try to burst you quickly and win, they slowly build up resources by making 17 card turns take 9 hours and draw half their deck, putting a quarter of it into the drop zone, and all they do for that turn is ping you with a gun rod, kill one of your creatures, and maybe hit you for 2 damage. But once they have everything set up, Grandfather Clock is a hell of a finisher. Another deck to consider for the grind game would be Water. Water makes for some hilarious grinding with a similar concept to dungeon enemies, only you take your center unit and make that your revivable unit. And your center unit that you're going to be reviving is a base 1/2/6, as in it's got 6k defense naturally and 2 critical, which is great because you can have your powerful cards on the left and right swinging in and then hit them for 2 anyway with your wall. Now, that card, because of your set spells, Return to the Underworld, it becomes revivable every turn for 1 gauge. And then because of Shinotsukuame, it gets 2,000 to its stats, so now it's a 3/2/8. 8k defense. Size 1, revivable wall. Every single piece you need to fulfill this combo is also fishable, including the monster itself. So Water is actually looking to be a pretty solid grind deck. The only thing I think Water needs to bump itself up and be as strong as Skull Warriors would be Gale Sword, which is just their clone of Burning Fist. Pay 1 life, it's 3k, 1 crit, and it can attack from behind your center creature. If they get that, I feel like Water really has a chance to make a huge impact on the meta. Fourth, we have balanced decks. Decks that have a nice mix of defensive spells, defensive cards, offensive spells, offensive cards, card advantage, control, a jack of all trades. Thunder Knights would be a good example of this. They do a little bit of everything. Dragon Shields for defense, Thunder Drum and Fawn are both solid offensive units. Drago Archers, card draw is amazing. Purgatory Knights also kind of teeter between this and being a rush deck, depending on how you play it. I see a lot of people just sacrificing their entire field and swinging a billion times with Demios. Don't do that. Play the game smart. That's a finisher. If your opponent's at 4 life, do it. If your opponent's at 12 life, don't do it. Especially since they can counter with a Death Grip, kill Demios, and then you lost both units and got nothing out of it. So that's just my little sidetrack of the day. Non-dungeon enemy Dungeon World tends to not do so well for grinding, so that's why I would say Dungeon Mix is more balanced than it is a grind deck, even though it swings into sides and it gets card advantage. Because you only have 8 cards between your 4 Pillar of Fire and your 4 Shalsana that can actually protect you, Dungeon Mix isn't really a grind deck because you don't have the sustained defense to grind with. So I would like to say that that's more of a balanced deck. There is a 5th type of deck that I would like to bring up, and I like to call them gimmick decks, but troll decks work as well. These are your Wizard Burn decks, your Ragnarok Legend World decks, your 25 Impact Troll decks, your 50 Monster Troll decks, your No Monster Troll decks, your 42 Spell Citry Troll decks. Mostly things that cannot work, but sometimes the gimmick is legitimately strong and can make the deck as a whole function. Wizard Burn is one of those rare examples that work. One might argue that Judgment is a gimmick deck since the entire deck is focused on getting a single copy of your grade 3 out. However, you have so much stall with those Darkness Dragon World spells in it that it's likely that you will live long enough to see multiple copies of Judgment. So I don't really want to put that under the gimmick deck list. So now we're ready for the tier list. For the start of the tier list, you can probably guess after how much I've been, dick riding it. Tier 0.8. Actor Knight's Judgment, literally stronger than a deck should literally be allowed to be. Actor Knight's Judgment has been dominating my playtesting completely. I was 44-6 in my initial playtest with it, and I was winning against everything. Nothing was beating the deck. And one of my losses out of those 6 losses was to another Actor Knight's Judgment deck. So technically, Actor Knight's Judgment won 45 of those 50 matches, 90% win rate. I would expect a top tier deck to have, say, a 78% win rate, somewhere in that ballpark area. Like, close to 80%, but not quite 80%. But this deck was just blowing everything away. It was crazy. but I won't focus too much on that. It's going to have its own video later. For Tier 1, I have Skulls, Wizards, Legend Mix with Bloody King. We don't necessarily know if we're getting Bloody King soon or not, but if we do get it, it's going to make that deck. It is so, so good between Soul Guard, a discard ability that can destroy size 2 or less. It is really, really, really good. And all of the discard abilities, especially with Alvidal and Iceblade Joker, are going to make that deck amazing. And then you still have Cancer with Breath and Guard. It's going to be a really powerful deck when we get Bloody King. Until then, Legend Mix is probably going to go down to, say, Tier 1.1. So I wanted to toss that in there because we may or may not be getting that card. Generic Armordragons round out Tier 1, and you might be thinking, Tim, what? But trust me, I have playtested the ever-loving shit out of this deck. I love it. You have 12 cards that can kill anything, and everything is cheap in the deck. Drumsword really does make the deck because it doesn't cost anything to play, so without Drumsword, generic Armordragons would probably pop down to Tier 1.3. And Boomerang Dragon also is necessary for that deck to function because it triggers Drumsword, and it can also be played while you have Inferno Armor on the field. So this deck is going to be very dependent on those two particular cards, and if we get them soon. Tier 1.01, close enough, might as well be Tier 1, but not quite. Demongodol Arc. I mean, you guys have probably seen Joel's deck list. It is ridiculous. Demongodol Arc is so incredibly hard to have to play around. However, every single deck that's above Demongodol Arc is a deck that counters it and can still play competitively in the meta. So the problem that Demongodol Arc is going to have is that some control decks can just get right around Barrier and Demongodol Arc Soul and swing into it. Like Legend Mix has 4 copies of Beowulf, 3 to 4 copies of Balmung. It's just not going to live long enough to make that sustained difference against any deck that's above it, but every deck that's beneath it, it can just completely destroy. So it's kind of teetering on that fragile balance between cards are finally able to catch up with and take on Demongodol Arc without having as much difficulty as they used to have previously. But it's still one of the most solid decks out there. Magic Burn, I'm putting at Tier 1.01 after playtesting. The addition of Andy and Merlin has really made that deck just completely stronger. Merlin for the turn 1 bonking. Like, I've done 6 damage to my opponent on turn 1 with absolutely nothing they could do about it. It's just crazy. And Abracadabra is still in the deck, so just having all of these options to ping your opponent down, swing in early, and negate for game, it's got a lot of tools in it, but I don't feel like it's as strong as the standard Wizards build yet. So it's kind of sitting there, hovering around a little bit, trying to figure out where it wants to be at. But for now, I'm going to still have Wizards as Tier 1 and Magic Burn as Tier 1.01. Because the decks are very, very similar to the point where there's not too much difference between them. But I feel like the grind of Wizards outbeats the burst of Magic Burn. Tier 1.05, this is where things are going to get a little bit difficult because Asmodai's backdrop deck has playtested incredibly well for me. You would be thinking with nothing but 1 critical size 1s and 2 critical size 2s that you wouldn't be able to get any damage in, but that's just the thing. People aren't using their Dragon Shields, they're not using their attack negates because they're like, oh, this is only 1 critical. And I'm not saying that everyone's going to do that all the time, but every single attack is for 1 packet of damage, so they really feel discouraged from using all of their defensive cards, and then suddenly you just bop them in the face with a 5 damage impact and then they cry. But the deck has control, it has cantrip with Dance Asmodai, it can protect its creatures, it can remove other creatures, it has everything that a deck needs to be a successful grind deck with that surprise burst burn at the end. And I really feel like the deck is going to be super strong, but it needs shiny Asmodai in order to be competitive. Super Tough is just going to be added in because it has Asmodai in the name, but I almost never play it unless I'm up against Seeger. So it really just needs shiny Asmodai to be playable, but I would like Super Tough just for the impact. For Tier 1.1, I have Purgatory Knights, with every single promo that Purgatory Knights will have available. Purgatory Knights is sitting pretty strong right now. I haven't been able to playtest it completely, but I know that it's at least Tier 1.1, and I don't want to sell it short. It has all of that capability to just deal ridiculous amounts of damage consistently with the spell support that it has. It is very, very susceptible to counter destruction, and counter destruction is just going to make the deck feel awful, terrible. It's going to make it hate itself. So right now, Purgatory Knights are its biggest counter because Death Grip. And you know what other deck runs Death Grip? Actor Knight's Judgment. Another reason why I'm thinking Actor Knight's Judgment is going to Dark Horse so big is because I'm expecting the Purgatory Knights hype to be so large that it's going to be overrepresented for how strong it actually is as a deck. And then Actor Knight's Judgment's just going to be like, oh, you're going to restand. No, Death Grip. But all that aside, Purgatory Knights is still a very solid deck. And I would like to test it out with all of the support cards that Buddyfight area currently doesn't have before I make a finalized choice. So right now I'm actually setting it up higher than what I would have normally set it up at. And it may eventually settle to tier 1.3 or even 1.5 if the playtesting doesn't go as well. But I want to make sure that I have a fair representation of it before I really settle it in on the tier list. But right now I'm saying 1.1 just as my best guess. Water isn't quite as strong as Skulls, but it's still a very solid deck. You can tell just by how I was talking about it with the grind section. It pretty much only loses if your opponent can consistently get over that 8k wall and or if your opponent is running Penetrate. If they're not, and if they can't get rid of your set spells, you essentially force them to link attack your center every single turn, and there's nothing they can do about it. So Water as a grind deck is working out extremely well. 72 Pillars really got a huge buff. Whether or not they're stronger than Wizards or not is debatable, and a lot of people are pushing me to push 72 Pillars up on the list. However, 72 Pillars have a core weakness, and that's that if their spell gets negated, then they've lost all of their offensive capability. So they're kind of floating around in their spell reliance. Like, I've won many games against Elliot's 72 Pillars deck just by using a spell negate on Devil Fever, and then he didn't have the gauge to pay for anything else. So right now 72 Pillars are as high as they are because of one card, and that's Elagos. Elagos essentially negates Link Attack, Spell Negate, Cheese for game, which is another reason why I'm using my spell negates on Stopping Fever instead of using them on Link Attack, Cheese for game, because Elagos will just pop into the center and then come back to hand, and then pop into the center and then come back to hand, and it costs a little bit of life. So the only way that you can reliably get around it is if you have Penetrate or some way to burn him. But even then, he has several other defensive cards that can come in and save him if Elagos isn't going to do it. But then Elagos just saves the card advantage over time. So right now, Elagos is really, really making it so that those high critical rush decks can't destroy it. But it's a high attack rush deck itself, so it's bypassing all of these shields by having so many attacks, and it's bypassing a lot of defensive cards. So this deck is actually going to be really solid. It may even be higher on the tier list than what I'm giving it credit for. But I'm keeping it right now at 1.1 just because I feel like that's where it belongs. Deck is actually fairly ridiculous. Drumsword and Boomerang are going to help it right now, but I don't want you to think that that's not going to make the deck, more ridiculous. Because right now it's still ridiculous. I didn't word that right, and I apologize for that. Deck is going to have a lot of cheap 1 gauge add a soul. So you call out normal Drum, and it gets Soul Guard, and that was 1 gauge. You put Super Drum on top of that, now you have 2 soul. You put another Super Drum on top of that, now it has 3 soul. You move it to the center. Not a lot of decks are running Penetrate anymore because people are expecting an open center meta, but Drum just completely gets rid of that because he's like Death Talika, only not bad. And I really want to push that point that all of the free soul that Drum's getting by evolving Drum multiple times is really going to help protect your center. And Deck has that combination of high offense, high defense. Drumsword and Boomerang are really going to help the deck out too. And it's going to be a strong deck, probably one of the stronger variants that Dragon World has available. And it might even be a good counter to a lot of those decks that have a lot of control cards, like, say, generic Armordragons. Moving on, Adventurer Rush right now I'm saying is tier 1.3. It's the strongest rush deck that we have other than 72 Pillars, and it's still going to be viable in the meta pretty much forever. And the reason for that is it has so much toolbox and a consistent, really powerful turn 2, to the point where if your opponent just happens to not draw defensive cards, it's going to win. And it will always have that, and it's never not going to have that. So that's one of the things that's going to keep Adventurer Rush relevant, even when it shouldn't be relevant. And as long as your opponent can't draw those defensive cards, which, your deck only has so many defensive cards, you're going to get a bad hand one of those days, then Adventurer Rush is going to continue to have all of the tools that it needs to just destroy you. So that's one of the things that I mentioned in the Rush article, in the Rush section of this video, and it's going to continue to be that way indefinitely because there's never going to be anything to invalidate the need to draw defense. Dungeon enemies, I'm putting at tier 1.3 with Dea Cruiser. Dea Cruiser is going to make that deck extremely powerful because it has the ability to search your drop zone for a Destruction or a Demon Lord. So it itself is a Demon Lord. You can essentially pay 2 gauge, get another copy of itself from the drop zone, and have Infinity Soul Guard and Infinity Wall, and that's going to make the deck really, really grindy, even though it's already extremely grindy. So when you don't have Meteor Rain, you're going to have Dea Cruiser, and he's just going to keep spamming Dea Cruiser. Alternatively, if it's your first Dea Cruiser, you could get a Dominion Rod or a Demon Lord's Dungeon from your drop zone, bring them back to your hand, and either charge the additional rod since you already have one in play, or play the Demon Lord's Dungeon and get back all of your size zeros for free. Let's say your opponent's destroying your Demon Lord's Dungeons, and you're like, hey, don't do that. And then you get it back. I mean, it's giving the deck a lot of options, and it's finally giving the deck an alternative size 3 other than Big Awesome Dog that can really, really bring the deck together. And the fact that it's a Demon Lord, the fact that it searches Demon Lords, the fact that it has Soul Guard, the fact that it's cheap, the fact that it has good stats, all of these things are mixing together to make that an extremely, extremely solid addition to the deck. For tier 1.5, I have Thunder Knights, and I kind of talked on Thunder Knights before. They're just an extremely well-balanced deck that can do a little bit of everything, and because they can do a little bit of everything, they don't really have any weaknesses, but they also don't have Spell Negate Cheese. They also don't have too many things that give them super strength, and their dependence on Drago Archer is making them stay at tier 1.5 in my opinion. Dungeon Mix is what a lot of people would think would be the best variant of Dungeon World. It's actually the worst. But all that aside, Dungeon Mix is not a bad deck. It's tier 1.5. And what I wanted to say about Dungeon Mix is that even though it tries to be a grind deck, but it doesn't have the spell support to be a grind deck, it can still make your opponent run out of cards, and then you just sit on a wall of a hand. And eventually, if you draw that many cards, you're going to draw into your defensive cards. Your opponent may or may not be able to stop your high defense if you're drawing into cards like Pillar of Fire, and if Pillar of Fire can hit their cards, because Pillar of Fire is going to be a control card that will function with your grind and minus them while they're trying to attack and also protect you. So Pillar of Fire is the make or break deal for that deck, but you only have 4 copies. You only have 4 Shalsana. That's why Dungeon Mix has to be lower on the tier list, because of its built-in inconsistency, even though it's toolboxy and even though it has card advantage. So it's going to be sitting there in kind of an awkward space for quite a while until Dungeon World gets more spell support that can make it function as a deck. Jackknife Goldritter is so extremely easy to play around that it has to be tier 1.5. It's still viable, and I wanted to make this point. Every single deck that's above tier 2, I think, is a perfectly fine, competitive, viable tournament deck. But that doesn't mean that, some viable tournament decks aren't better than other viable tournament decks. Jackknife Goldritter is just sitting there with a lot of weaknesses. Any single attack negate can just shut it down completely. It does get a little bit better with the Golden Buddy pack because there's a size 0 Dragon Knight that has 2 critical, and its only requirement is that you have another Dragon Knight on the field, which Jackknife Goldritter is. So the addition of size zeros will help Goldritter a little bit, but I'm not super convinced that it's going to be enough to make the deck viable, because it's really, really hard to fit things in there and still have the consistency to get out Goldritter. Like, I'm going to be perfectly honest. With my Goldritter build, I've never missed Goldritter. Not a single game. However, I'm not sold that there's enough space to consistently hit Goldritter and have those size zeros in there and have enough defense to keep yourself alive, because you have to neg yourself down to 5 life with Thunderstorm in order to be able to bring out Goldritter. And that's where you have to think of the balances for your deck and weigh the pros versus the cons. And because Jackknife has all of those complicated options, I don't feel like all of them mesh together as well as it should be for it to be higher than tier 1.5. Tier 2 is where we start to get out of the non-competitively viable decks. So I'll start off with Blue Sky Knights. Blue Sky Knights got huge quality of life buffs. And while it's not enough to make the deck super strong, and any deck that's running the spell support for Blue Sky Knights can do what Blue Sky Knights does, only better, they're still a thing, and they can still work. There's not too much else to really say on them. They just gain a bunch of life, and they protect their creatures, and then they try to gain more life. And that's pretty much all they do, and sometimes the grind game can work, but typically if your opponent is swinging into your creatures and forces you to burn up all of your cards, they'll lose the grind game to most conventional decks. And that's unfortunate, because they're supposed to be a grind deck themselves. Seeger, I'm putting at tier 2 for now. He may be tier 1.5, he may even be tier 1.3, but from what I've seen, he just really hasn't gotten the quality of life changes he needs to be stronger. And even with Demonica, even with Wrath Trigger, every single thing that keeps Seeger alive right now costs Gauge. He really just needs like a Midnight Shadow clone. Well, Midnight Shadow would be difficult to call it the right thing because Midnight Shadow doesn't stop link attacks, and typically people have to link attack to get over Seeger. It's really difficult to say what the Seeger deck needs, but it needs some kind of costless attack negate, in my opinion, in order for it to get up to viability, because right now it's the fact that every single thing that it tries to use costs Gauge that's keeping it down. No Size 3 Ancient World is one of those troll decks that I built that happened to work a little bit. It has no attack negates in it whatsoever, but it focuses on using Agasbruck, Dragon Thunder, and Dragon Flame Cascade as counter-destruction abilities in order to destroy certain things. And it can beat Legend World, it can beat Katana World, it can beat ninjas, it can beat wizards, all because all of its destruction pretty much just hits size 1s. So because it has all of this board wiping counter destruction that hits size 1s, it can get away with that. And then it has a bunch of 3 crit size 1s, 3 crit size 2s to just rush and try and win the game quickly, while having the spell support of Ancient World with Divine Dragon Creation and Dragon Emperor Legend to get a bunch of cards, get a bunch of Gauge, get a bunch of life if necessary. But all in all, that doesn't save the deck when, if you go second, you have absolutely nothing that can stop an attack unless your opponent happens to play a card with 2,000 or less power or defense, and you have absolutely nothing that can stop items. So Ancient World, no size 3 Ancient World is not necessarily going to be looking good anytime soon. However, future support for Seeger may or may not increase it and make it better. Armor Knight Ace is not in a very viable spot right now, mostly because it's so combo-ish, and combo decks aren't necessarily working out super great right now. I've seen Ace decks just miss their weapon completely. Until Danger World gets a weapon tutor, I'm going to say Armor Knight Ace is permanently stuck in tier 2. It doesn't have what it needs to really make itself stronger right now. Rounding out the list is tier 3. We have ninjas. Ninjas just don't have anything going for them. I mean, super lethal costs a Gauge now, so you're never, ever going to be able to activate Lethal Formation's effect without drawing into a clear Serenity. All of the ninja monster support is only going more towards Lethal Formation. So even though they started off with the best size 1 in the game, Tsukikage, they really don't have anything going for them, and they haven't for a while. They really do need Gale Sword, much like Water did, in order to get competitive viability. And even then, they're just sitting there getting a bunch of really, really crappy monsters that aren't helping push the deck, and a bunch more Gauge cost when the deck is already a Gauge whore. So they're really, really just sitting in a bad spot right now, and I'm not sure if they're going to reach competitive viability without some major drastic change to themselves. Non-mixed Legend World. Up above, I did list Legend Mix as a tier 1 deck. If you're playing any Legend World deck and you're not mixing other support cards from other aspects of Legend World into your deck is bad. It's just bad. If you're playing Ragnarok, your deck's bad. If you're playing Heroes and you don't have Zlatarog, your deck's bad. If you're playing Wider Sarkal and you don't have Alvadal, and if you don't have some discard mechanics in, your deck's bad. It's just how it has to be. Right now, the best Legend World deck has a little bit of everything in it, and not choosing to make the most out of your deck to keep it thematic is going to kill your deck. It's literally going to make it drop from tier 1 all the way down to tier 3, because Heroes without Zlatarog, Wider Sarkal without good good cards, and Asgard just trying to be Asgard is going to make your deck fail horribly, and that's all there really is to it. And rounding out the tier list, we have non-Purgatory Knights, Darkness Dragon World. And right now, Deep, Death, and Black Dragons, none of them are strong. They just aren't. Death Talica doesn't really help Deep out enough to make it worth it. None of the decks are really working in playtesting, and all of them are really susceptible to their own Gauge costs. The thing that makes Purgatory Knights work is that most of them don't cost anything. And it's kind of like and I know this is going to be a cheesy example, but set 12 Revengers, the reason why Revenger Raging Form Dragon worked so well for that meta wasn't because he's a good card, because he's a shitty card. It worked because he didn't cost any counterblasts. And it's the same way with Purgatory Knights. They don't cost any gauge, and that's why they're working over the other decks, even though Black Dragons, in theory, should be stronger, even though Death, in theory, should have some useful matchups, even though it never does ever, because we have an open center meta, even though Deep has their cool little Death Talica. It's not saving them. It's not redeeming them, and that's kind of why Darkness Dragon World is continually stuck in this tier 3 bottom of the barrel tier, and it's not going to change anytime soon because the spell support is amazing, but it all costs gauge, and the only way that you can get the gauge to pay for your spells is to sacrifice your creature with Devil Stigma, and Devil Stigma is already minusing you. So you're just looking at either losing the grind game from running out of cards or losing the game from not having enough gauge to pay for your own spells. And even then, like, I like Spectral Strike. I think it's a great mechanic, but when all of your cards are counter destruction, then you're no longer going to have the targets that you need to Spectral Strike against. So you're sitting there with with decks that essentially all contradict themselves or contradict the meta, and they can't really compete in that type of environment. So as it stands right now, non-Purgatory Knight Darkness Dragon World is just going to continue to be tier 3 until they get something that changes that, but I'm not even convinced if there is anything that exists that could possibly change that. If I had to take the deck types and make a hierarchy of which types of decks tend to do better than other types of decks, it would look something like this. Actonite's Judgment is stronger than Control, is stronger than Grind, is stronger than Rush, is stronger than Balanced. However, this obviously isn't a given for all instances of all decks. As I mentioned earlier, crossing over into multiple different archetypes of decks and doing each of them well is the key to a powerful deck that can transcend the hierarchy. Thunder Knights gets away with being strong in spite of being a balanced deck because of how much raw versatility it has, and its defensive options can border on the grind deck level. Rush decks can win against anything if they open with a spell negate or if the opponent doesn't draw enough defensive cards early. Control decks can have trouble if they're forced to field their valuable plussing cards early before taking out the key cards of their opponent. Grind decks often need setup. Sometimes this includes set spells or items. If they get their sets or items blown up, then they often lose their capacity to grind properly. Regardless, a well-aimed control deck can and will dominate. If you tech in and can reliably remove Return to the Underworld that a Skull player has set, their deck will suffer immensely. If you can negate a Kosher for Wizards and they no longer have gauge to pay, and their turn fizzles from it, you could have just won the game. That being said, those at the top of my list have trickier counterplay, incredibly solid offense and defense, and enough control, rushing potential, or just being ridiculous in Skull Warriors' case, that they are going to be tough to win against regardless of what gets thrown at them. As a side note, Skulls are crazy. They don't even have a classification. They're black, blue, red, which makes them Grind, Control, Rush. That's their deck type, Grind, Control, Rush. And the Control also deals damage while setting up the Grind, so that's a Rush too. The grinding aspect gives them more units to rush with, so that's Rush too. Judgment does counter the deck completely, but other than that, it's insanely powerful. One of the strongest decks we've got in the meta, because it does so many things so well. In closing, I would like to say that my list isn't the do-all end-all of Set 5 in the Golden Buddy Pack. This is just what I've observed after hundreds and hundreds of test games. Some decks can't even be considered on this list, like Asmodai, because it's not looking like we're going to have the promos we need for the deck anytime soon. Some decks have their most valuable cards as the only cards that they're missing, like Boomerang Dragon for Armordragons, and Joker Grunwald for dungeon enemies. The trend I am seeing, though, is that decks with spell negates, especially spell negates that they can afford to play, are going to rise up on the list and take a dominant stage in this meta. Brethren Guard, Abracadabra, Sakura Fubuki are all extremely lethal in this mostly open center meta we have. Judgment's +3 life and +4 net cards on a 6/3/6 body have tested stupid well, going 44-6 on my first 50 bouts, with one of those losses being in a mirror match. People aren't going to agree that my list at first sight is accurate if they haven't been play testing many of these decks too much in the Set 5 meta. Once Daycruiser gets released on Buddyfight area, expect a big awesome dragon deck list video soon. I have everything I need to make a Judgment video, but I have like 25 wins saved in my replays folder, and they range from my opponent having 0 cards in hand at the end of the game and 0 life, to my having 8 cards and 16 life, to me going all the way down to 1 life with 2 cards in hand versus my opponent's 11 life, and then me winning with 7 life and them having no cards again. It's a really, really dumb card. Maybe even ban-worthy, but I have a feeling that while it may see play and it may even top, it's too soon for a hit list in Buddyfight, so as long as too many people don't run Judgment, it won't become too big of a deal. I'll post a Skulls list at some point in time. My list is finalized, I just need to play it a bit more and get some good replays for an example video. Unlike Vanguard, I don't think a single game will suffice for showing off a deck, but I'm having difficulties making scripts for such lengthy, in-depth videos. I'll figure something out, as I'm sure people are very interested in how I run decks for Buddyfight. Then again, I could also throw a curveball and just do generic Armordragons first, as I feel it's one of the more simple decks to play, and it's potent enough to have made tier 1 on my list. But it's also a deck that many people don't necessarily agree with that it should be as high on the list as I make it, so I would like to showcase that one as well. We'll see. I hope I've given you something to look forward to in the near future. Let me know if you like my tier list. I'm expecting most people to hate it. Why aren't my Edge Knights edgy enough to be tier -1? Quit your tomfoolery. Damien Sort Dragub is best Dragub. But I digress. These are just my opinions after a lot of playtesting. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think. Comment, reply to my posts on Facebook or Pojo. Tell me what you agree on, what you disagree on. Make me feel your Angst Knight wrath, because Edge Knight Tasuku is totally not Chod from Mega Man Battle Network. I had to struggle to say his name like they do in the show because I took French in college. With that being said, have a good one.